There's a threshold every man carries inside him, a line drawn not in sand but in stone. The patient man, the gentle soul, the one who believes love means understanding, he has boundaries too. And when those boundaries are tested repeatedly, pushed beyond recognition, something fundamental shifts. Not because he wanted it to, but because survival demanded it. The patient man doesn't begin his journey with clenched fists or raised voices. He begins with open hands and an open heart. He believes that relationships are built on communication, compromise, and kindness. He listens when she speaks. He considers her perspective. He gives her the space to be imperfect because he knows he's imperfect too. He's the man who thinks before he reacts, who chooses his words carefully, who would rather solve problems than create new ones. But something happens in the space between his patience and her perception of it. His calmness gets misread. His willingness to understand becomes permission to disrespect. His silence during her storms gets interpreted not as strength, but as weakness. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the dynamic begins to shift. She starts testing him. Not always consciously, but instinctively. A sharp comment here, a dismissive gesture there. Small acts of disrespect that would have been unthinkable in the beginning now become routine. She watches to see if he'll react, if he'll establish a boundary, if he'll show her where the line is. But because he's patient, because he's committed to being the bigger person, he absorbs it. He tells himself she's just having a bad day. He makes excuses for behavior that shouldn't need excusing. And what does patience earn him? More testing. Because to a woman seeking emotional validation through intensity, a calm man feels like a blank canvas. She wants to see him react, to feel his emotions, to know that she can affect him, so she pushes harder. The sarcasm becomes sharper, the criticisms more frequent. Affection gets weaponized, withdrawn strategically to see if he'll chase it. Arguments become circular, designed not to resolve anything but to generate heat. The patient man finds himself in an exhausting cycle. He tries to communicate his feelings, but his words are dismissed or turned against him. He attempts to set boundaries, but they're treated as suggestions rather than requirements. He shows up consistently, but his presence becomes expected rather than appreciated. Every effort he makes to maintain peace actually feeds the dysfunction, because she's learned something dangerous. He'll tolerate almost anything. This is where the tragedy deepens. These aren't men who lack self-respect from the start. These are men who believed that love meant endurance, that real strength was measured in how much you could withstand for someone you cared about. They watched their fathers stay silent during arguments. They heard that real men don't react emotionally. They internalized the message that patience equals maturity. And now that very patience is being used against them. The woman in this scenario often doesn't see herself as the aggressor. In her mind, she's simply being herself, expressing her emotions, expecting him to step up. She doesn't recognize that being herself has become a license for disrespect. She doesn't realize that expressing emotions has turned into emotional manipulation. She genuinely believes that if he really cared, he'd fight harder, speak louder, show more passion. She mistakes his measured responses for indifference, never understanding that his calmness is actually incredible restraint. What she fails to see is the internal war he fights every single day. The conversations he rehearses in his head that never make it to his lips because he knows they'll be twisted. The hurt that accumulates in his chest like water behind a dam. The growing realization that nothing he does will ever be enough. Because she's not looking for solutions. She's addicted to the problem. He starts to notice patterns. When things are calm, she creates chaos. When he's been particularly patient, she escalates her behavior. When he shows vulnerability, it gets filed away and used against him later. The very qualities that made him attractive in the beginning, his stability, his emotional control, his consistency, have become the things she resents most. because stability feels boring when you're chasing emotional highs. The transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's not a single event that breaks him. It's the accumulation of 1,000 small disrespects, 1,000 moments where his truth was swallowed to keep the peace, 1,000 times his effort went unacknowledged. He starts to feel invisible in his own relationship. His needs don't matter. His feelings don't count. His perspective is always wrong. And the only time she really sees him is when he finally stops being patient. This is the cruel irony. The moment he sets a firm boundary, the moment he says no without apologizing, the moment his voice rises because he's finally had enough, that's when she pays attention. That's when she suddenly realizes he's serious. But instead of recognizing her role in pushing him to that point, she focuses entirely on his reaction. She tells friends he's become angry, that he's changed, that he's not the man she fell in love with. She rewrites history, casting herself as the victim of his transformation. But the truth lives in the details she conveniently forgets. The months or years of disrespect that preceded his breaking point. The countless times he asked for basic consideration and was ignored. The way his gentleness was mistaken for weakness and exploited accordingly. She remembers his anger, but not her provocation. She recalls his withdrawal, but not the 1,000 times she pushed him away first. The psychological toll on the patient man is immense. He begins questioning everything about himself. Maybe he's too sensitive. Maybe he's not man enough. Maybe if he just tried a different approach, things would improve. He reads articles about communication. He suggests counseling. He bends over backward trying to understand her perspective while his own perspective is never considered. And through it all, he's slowly losing himself. His friends notice the change before he does. The light in his eyes dims, his laughter becomes rare. He stops talking about his relationship because he's tired of making excuses for her behavior. He becomes a ghost of who he used to be, going through the motions of life while internally dying from emotional neglect and disrespect. What makes this particularly devastating is the nature of the erosion. It's not one massive betrayal he could point to and say, "This is when everything changed." It's death by 1,000 paper cuts, each one small enough to rationalize, to excuse, to move past. But together they form a pattern of disrespect so clear that even he can't deny it anymore. He remembers the man he used to be before this relationship, the one who laughed easily, who trusted freely, who believed in love without cynicism. That man feels like a stranger now. In his place stands someone harder, more guarded, less willing to give the benefit of the doubt. And while part of him mourns that loss, another part recognizes it as necessary armor in a war he never wanted to fight. The patient man starts keeping score even though he hates himself for it. He notices that he's the one who always apologizes first, even when he wasn't wrong. He's the one who plans dates, remembers anniversaries, puts in effort to keep romance alive. He's the one who asks about her day, her feelings, her needs. And what does he get in return? Criticism about what he's not doing, complaints about what he's doing wrong, and an ever-growing list of ways he's failing to meet expectations that keep shifting. She complains he doesn't communicate, but every time he tries to have a serious conversation, she either shuts down, gets defensive, or turns it around on him. She says she wants honesty, but when he's honest about his feelings, she makes him feel guilty for having them. She claims she values his opinion, but only when it aligns with hers. The goalposts keep moving, and he's exhausted from chasing a target he can never hit. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being in a relationship where you're emotionally abandoned. He can be sitting right next to her and feel completely alone. He can pour his heart out and feel like he's talking to a wall. He can show up every single day and still feel invisible. This loneliness is worse than being actually alone because it comes wrapped in the illusion of companionship. And then one day, something shifts. It's not dramatic. There's no final blowout argument. He simply stops trying. The effort that once came naturally now feels impossible. The love he felt transforms into protective indifference. He's still physically present, but emotionally he's checked out. He's realized that his patience wasn't being honored. It was being exploited. His kindness wasn't building a relationship, it was enabling dysfunction. This is when she panics, because a patient man going silent is terrifying in a way anger never is. Anger can be managed, manipulated, redirected. But cold indifference, that's impenetrable. She suddenly wants to talk about everything he tried to discuss for months. She's ready to work on the relationship he begged her to prioritize. She promises change now that he's stopped asking for it. But it's too late. Not because he's vindictive, but because he's exhausted. He's given every piece of himself and watched it be treated as insufficient. He's explained himself until the words lost meaning. He's fought for a relationship while she fought against his peace. And now, when she's finally ready to participate, he has nothing left to give. The patient man turned cold is one of the saddest transformations because it was entirely preventable. If his early boundaries had been respected, if his calm demeanor had been valued instead of tested, if his consistent presence had been appreciated rather than taken for granted, he would have remained the gentle soul she claims to miss. But she didn't want that version of him. She wanted the excitement of pushing him to his limits, and now she has to live with the consequences. What many women fail to understand is that a man's patience is not infinite. It's a resource, and like all resources, it can be depleted. Every time she disrespects him without consequence, she makes a withdrawal. Every time she tests his boundaries, she takes a piece, and she keeps taking until one day she reaches for more and finds the account empty. The patient man has become the unavailable man. The gentle soul has hardened into stone, and the love she took for granted is now permanently out of reach. The most painful part is that he never wanted this outcome. He didn't enter the relationship planning to become emotionally distant. He didn't wake up one day and decide to stop caring. He was conditioned into it through repeated disappointment, through having his patience mistaken for weakness, through realizing that his peace of mind was less important to her than her emotional stimulation. There's a specific moment every patient man experiences, though he might not recognize it at the time. It's the moment when he stops explaining himself. When someone asks how his relationship is going, he just says fine instead of sharing the truth. When she does something hurtful, he doesn't bother bringing it up because he knows it won't lead anywhere productive. When he feels something, he keeps it to himself because vulnerability has become a liability. This is the moment his anger begins, not as an explosion but as a withdrawal, because anger isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quietest thing in the room. It's the way he stops initiating affection, the way his responses become shorter, the way he stops sharing his thoughts, his dreams, his fears. It's not that he's trying to punish her, it's that he's protecting what's left of himself. Every time he opened up, she used it against him. Every time he showed softness, she interpreted it as weakness. So he stopped giving her ammunition. Men like this often struggle to trust again. They carry the scars of being emotionally exploited for their best qualities. They become guarded, suspicious, unwilling to show the vulnerability that was used against them before. And while this protects them from future harm, it also robs them of the openness that made love possible in the first place. This is the lasting damage, not just a broken relationship, but a broken belief in what relationships can be. He starts to see patterns in other relationships around him. He notices his friends going through similar experiences. He hears stories from other men who gave everything and ended up with nothing. And he realizes this isn't just his story, it's a common tragedy. The patient man who loved too much, tolerated too much, and lost himself in the process. What's particularly cruel is how society views his transformation. When he finally sets boundaries, he's called controlling. When he stops tolerating disrespect, he's labelled as difficult. When he prioritises his own peace, he's accused of being selfish. There's no acknowledgement of the years he spent putting her needs first, the countless times he swallowed his pride, the endless patience he demonstrated. People only see the end result. A man who seems angry, cold, distant. They don't see the journey that led him there. The anger that eventually surfaces isn't irrational rage, it's accumulated disappointment. It's the natural response of someone who's been pushed past their limit. It's what happens when kindness is consistently met with cruelty, when effort is met with entitlement, when love is met with manipulation. This anger is actually a sign of health, a sign that he still has enough self-respect left to recognise that he deserves better. But by the time this anger surfaces, the relationship is already over in all the ways that matter. The emotional connection has been severed, the trust has been destroyed, the respect is gone. What remains is just two people going through the motions, one trying desperately to fix what she broke, the other too exhausted to care anymore. She'll often try to use his anger against him, pointing to it as proof that he's the problem. She'll tell people he became abusive, that he changed, that she didn't recognise him anymore. What she won't mention is how she spent months or years pushing every button she could find. How she tested every boundary until it broke. How she took his gentleness and mistook it for weakness, then complained when he finally showed strength. The lesson here cuts both ways. For women, understand that a patient man is not a weak man. His calmness is strength. His silence during your storms is discipline. His willingness to forgive is grace. Don't mistake these qualities for permission to disrespect him. Don't test his boundaries until they become walls. Don't push his patience until it transforms into permanent distance. Value his peace before he's forced to choose it over you. For men, understand that patience without boundaries is self-destruction. Your calmness should be honoured, not exploited. Your kindness should be reciprocated, not taken for granted. Love should never require you to consistently diminish yourself to accommodate someone else's chaos. There's profound strength in walking away from a relationship that demands your sanity as payment for affection that isn't freely given. The patient man who becomes angry isn't weak or broken. He's human. He's simply reached the limit that every person has, the point where self-preservation overrides the desire to make things work. And while that anger might be uncomfortable, it's also the signal that he's finally choosing himself, that he's drawing the line that should have been respected all along. Real love doesn't test patience until it breaks. Real love honours it, protects it, builds upon it. Real love doesn't confuse calmness with weakness or silence with permission. It recognises that a patient man is rare and valuable, someone to be cherished rather than challenged. And when that recognition is missing, when patience is met with provocation instead of appreciation, the patient man has every right to walk away. Because at the end of the day, no relationship is worth losing yourself over. No love should cost you your peace. And any woman who turns your greatest strengths into a playground of manipulation doesn't deserve the version of you that was willing to endure for her sake. Save that patience, that kindness, that gentle strength for someone who sees it for what it truly is. Not weakness to be exploited, but a gift to be treasured. The patient man doesn't become angry because he's flawed. He becomes angry because his boundaries were violated so consistently that anger became the only language left. And that's not on him. That's on the person who kept pushing until something inside him finally pushed back. In the end, the transformation from patient to angry is a tragedy for everyone involved. She loses a good man who would have moved mountains for her. He loses his faith in love and his willingness to be vulnerable. and both are left wondering how something that started with so much promise could end in such pain. The answer is simple, but hard to accept. Patience is powerful, but it's not infinite, and when it runs out, no amount of regret can bring back what was lost.